referencing it is because Lost Illusions has some allusions to it. Now, we're talking about 1821, and there's a 20-year-old, an orphaned 21-year-old, or he claims he's orphaned, Lucien du Rue-Pembray, played by Benjamin Voisin. He's a budding poet. He works at a print factory in provincial France, and he's fated by a noble woman, a patroness called Louise de Bargeton, played by Cécile de France, who we've seen in quite a number of movies. The pair, and she's much older, but the pair begins a hot and heavy affair. Both of them are heavily invested in it. Problem is that if the scandal ever became common knowledge, well-mannered de Bargeton, the Cécile de France character, her standing in society would be irreparably harmed. And as a result, after he travels with her to Paris, she's forced to make a clean break, leaving Rupembre heartbroken. And he's penniless as well. So he picks up work in a restaurant. He actually resorts to eating patron scraps. That's how hard up he is. He eyes off writing as a full-time profession. And he befriends a young, hash-smoking, anti-establishment editor called Etienne Lousteau, played by Vincent Lacoste. And Lacoste, or Lousteau rather, opens Rupembre's eyes to the money that can be made from what I call immoral journalism. Isn't it ever, Jackie? Immoral.
Everything's for sale, Alex.
It is, absolutely. And I speak of writing without a shred of credibility. It's lapped up by readers, specifically negative and positive book and theatre reviews that are literally sold, not literally, are sold to the highest bidder. So in other words, if you pay more than somebody else, we'll badmouth somebody else and we'll praise you. Corruption is obviously rife. Businessmen, merchants, actors, many more play a part in perpetuating and strengthening this horrible practice. Soon, Rupembre is up to his eyeballs in it as well, seemingly able to churn out very witty adverse prose at will. Now, here's the point where I'm going to step off for a moment. And I'm going to ask each and every one of you, when you write your reviews, and even if they're notes for this program or if they're written reviews, do you find it harder or easier to write a bad review? And I'm going to go through each of you. Let's start with you, Peter. What do you reckon?
Oh, a review is a review. It's easy. It's no more difficult to write a review in a positive way as it is to write a film that's negative.
Let me ask an ancillary question. Suppose what I really meant was, do you enjoy writing a negative review because it allows your juices to turn over, shall we say? not that you don't want to like something, but when you do, I suppose that's the real question.
I call it as I see it, and I am just as happy writing a negative as well as a positive review. So no, it doesn't change my demeanour at all.
Jackie, what about you?
I find it's a lot more fun to enjoyable to be writing a review where it's at the extremes. You either really, really loved it or it was terrible, because you can use far more descriptive language for either end. Whereas if it's kind of down the middle, muddling, it's a lot harder to get excited about it, I suppose. So it's a lot harder to write in an excited way.
Do you find that it takes, if you're really into something, the writing is quicker? Whereas, what you've said, if it's a middle of the road or you haven't really concentrated hard enough, etc., because reviews...
No.
Okay.
Give it a time, a deadline, and you just got to do it.
Now, Dave, you and I write a lot of reviews. What about you? What's your experience in terms of, do you like writing one more than another? Do you find it easier to write one more than another?
I find it easier to write a review if I've liked a film or hated it. I'm like Jackie. The difficult ones for me are when they're just kind of middle of the road films and you're giving them 2.5 stars or 3. If it's a 5-star film or if it's a 1-star film, they're a lot easier to write the review for, I find.
Interesting. Okay, because I'm a little bit different to all of you then, because I reckon you can really go to town on something that you don't like. Not that I think overall most of the things I do like. So there are a few occasions though that you sort of rub your hands in glee and say, look, this was a load of tripe. How do we express that in words other than saying just load of tripe, load of tripe, load of tripe. And I think there's sort of a guilty pleasure in the negative. Does that make sense, Jackie?
Oh, I don't really agree with you, Alex. Because you're saying a lot more than just load of tripe. You're actually getting into the detail of which aspects of it didn't work or were appalling or were completely wrong or you didn't like at all. You're not just saying it's a load of tripe.
No.
There's detail in there.
Yeah, sure, but when you're saying I disagree, I'm talking for me in terms of writing, etc. It comes easier. I mean, some come easy anyway.
No, there are just as many adjectives to be used in the positive as the negative.
Yeah,
Alex.
but I do find that there's a difference. When you're writing certain things, I might take half hour to write one piece, and then I might take an hour and a half if I want to dwell on something, or I really love it, for example, and I want to make sure I go into further detail. What do you find, Dave? How long does it take you to write a review of a film or a show? Give me a variation. I think this is going to be useful, not useful, but interesting for the people who are listening to us.
Normally it takes me about 30 minutes to write a 1,500-word review, which is what I have to do for work. So, yeah, normally about...
1,500-word review.
Yeah, I write 1,500-word reviews for the paper that I work for. So, yeah, normally about 30 minutes.
Gee, that's very quick. Jackie, isn't it?
Wow, you are fast. Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Wow. Okay. But then it can vary, I'm presuming, Dave, for you as well?
Oh, definitely. There's sometimes I'll start to write a review and then I'll walk away from it and have to come back later. They're normally the ones, like I said before, that are middle of the road. But like for this week, I wrote a review for The Black Phone, which I absolutely loved. And I actually went 200 words over before I'd realised I'd gone over my word limit. And yeah, that was 30 to 35 minutes. So, yeah.
Do I have to pare it back then? I mean, have you got a limit as far as the page is concerned?
Yeah, because it's for a newspaper, so yeah, I had to rein it back in.
And it's often hard when you're trying to edit your own stuff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You're protective of the words. Peter, you don't do any written reviews, but you do a lot of radio reviews, to the best of my knowledge. Do you write everything out, or do you just do it through recollection?
It's mainly recollection. I do some prompt points so that I don't forget anything that I want to say on air, but it all flows easily.
So a prompt point might be, remember to disagree with Alex.
That's point number one every time.
Very, very pleasing. So really, but Peter, does that mean, you literally with these prompt points, I suppose what I like is that I'll give you a concrete example. When I saw Come Rain or Come Shine at the MTC a couple of nights ago, after the first few minutes, I turned to my wife and said, or whispered, "We've seen this." And she shook her head and said, "No." And I said, "I'm sure I've seen this." And the longer I saw it, or what longer it went, the more I was conscious that I'd seen it. Anyway, I then checked, and this really drove me nuts. And I couldn't find any reference to it. And I was sure I'd seen it only a year ago. Anyway, it was driving me batty, and I ended up ringing a couple of people who I thought might know, and one of them said, "Yeah, look, it was going to be with another actor and then COVID and whatever, but I'm sure it was the same name." I wasn't sure at all. I then rang a publicist not involved in this production at all, and he's got this wonderful system that he can look back on, and he recalled the name of it, but it was indeed under a different name, and it was sort of a work in progress at that time. And the benefit of that, I actually wrote it without looking at it, but often if you've seen something before or you want to recollect when you've seen something, to write a full review means that your mind, you've got a very good memory. You tend to remember things from when you were born in 1333, but nevertheless, if you ever want to go back to something and you haven't got detailed notes, what do? Peter?
You look it up. I mean, there's always research. I mean, it's very easy to find things out and do research.
Yeah. So you just basically look it up rather than looking at your own. Do you have a filing system where you keep everything you've done?
No.
Wow. Okay, Dave, I presume you do.
I use Dropbox online, so I've got every review that I've ever written since I was 15 years old on there. So,
well, Jackie, I had an experience that unfortunately my computer melted down. I hadn't backed it up, and I lost years worth. I'm still shattered by that. Has that happened to you?
It's happened to me with photos. I lost 2,500 photos last year. Yeah, because a cable failed when it was transferring.
And there's no resurrecting, going to some IT neighbour?
I might say Samsung was excellent. We've gone off topic, but Samsung was excellent. They actually spent 2 hours on the phone with me trying to resurrect it, but it was gone.
It's gone. No, part of the joy is going off topic. Okay, so we were talking about Lost Illusions, so we can get back on song. So basically is that, so you've got this, we've talked about the various characters, and we've said that corruption is rife, and basically you've got the lead character, Rupembra, played by Benjamin Voisin, who's, I mentioned, up to his eyeballs in this corruption, seemingly able to churn out these witty adverse prose that he does at will. And he catches the gaze of a young actress who's also been a prostitute called Coralie, played by Salome de Wales, and vice versa. She notices him. The pair falls madly, passionately in love. Rupembra's notoriety grows. He sees a chance to avenge his ill treatment at the hands of de Bargetten's conspirators. Remember, de Bargetten, the Cécile de France character, she had to break off the relationship because of what others would think if they ever found out. Also at stake is throwing off the shackles of a name that Rupembra despises. He gains there's also a title at stake and an ongoing stipend. That's part and parcel of what's at stake in Lost Illusions. But all's fair in love and war, and the writers Jacques Fleshy, Xavier Giannoli and Yves Stavridis have lovingly and deliciously adapted a 19th century novel of the same name by a French author, Honor de Balzac. And under the direction of Xavier Giannoli, Lost Illusions has all the hallmarks of this sweeping melodrama. Does it not, Dave?
It does. I absolutely adored this film, which was interesting because I went into it with a bit of a not another 2.5 hour movie, but I ended up absolutely adoring this film. I think one of the reasons I loved it was that even though it is set back in a period of time, it's very, very like what we are seeing now with media. Only about a decade ago, I was working at an outlet where they told me that I couldn't write negative reviews for any films that advertised in the newspaper. So I left there pretty quickly. But
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Was this an established paper, or was it a more...
It was a very, very established organisation.
And it still has that policy?
I don't know what the policy is these days, but yeah, that's what I was told when I was working there.
Dave. Jackie, you worked for the Herald Sun. Did they ever...
Yes.
Did they ever... Or have you ever come across that, what Dave's been told?
Never, absolutely never.
I'm horrified.
Decades of reviewing, never did anyone ever say anything or ever change the gist of what you were writing for that. No, not at all.
And Peter, I mean, you work for a number of different organisations. You've never been told that you can't write something, have you?
Never.
No, I mean, isn't that horrible? I mean, just listening to what Dave said, I'm just...
Well, it comes to credibility, Alex. I mean, if it got out that an organisation did that at the time, they just completely lose credibility. These scandal rags and this gutter journalism that's being talked about in this film, it just can't happen now, except online, of course.
Well, but
Dave, completely different story.
Dave's saying it did happen. I mean, and may still be happening.
I think it happens these days with politics. I reckon if you were a journalist at a certain radio station or newspaper and you didn't support or toe the line when it came to politics, you'd probably be shown the door.
Well, I mean, I hope
that they get. What I'm trying to say is that they get outed, and if they're outed, they don't have credibility.
But the question is, if they're outed, I'm just not convinced everybody would be outed, which I wish they would be. And this is where I reckon whistleblowers are really important in society. And at times...
And I think it's reader beware in terms of everything that's an opinion.
Well, I mean, asked. I'm sure that all of you have, at some point in your lives, been told, what a great job you've got, how do we become a reviewer? Peter, have people asked you that?
To some extent. I must say, when I worked for the Melbourne Catholic and wrote their reviews, I wrote 4 reviews every month, they never asked me to be careful not to review certain films or to say certain things, so it was never an issue.
Wow. Okay. Well, look. Let's get back to it, Dave. Sorry, you were commenting on Lost Illusions. Keep going, please.
Yeah, I just think that even though it's set back in a time place that's like a couple of centuries ago, we still see that kind of thing happen in journalism. So I think it is an important film in that way, that it does show what can happen. And I think it does take a fairly major swipe at some of the newspapers that are around these days with the way that they report on politics as well. Because, yes, we're talking about reviews and how the writer in this film is writing reviews, but also a lot of that was generated through politics, one being a royalist newspaper and the other one being a paper that was against the royal family and the king. So, yeah, you've got an interesting kind of slant there, I think, that we actually do see with modern-day journalism as well.
Well, the film's really rich in text and in settings, and the contrast between wealthy and impoverished is profound, isn't it, Peter?
It certainly is. The story, which was written by Honoré de Balzac, was part of a 3-volume story that Xavier Giannoli edited down into a 2.5-hour film, and it was always meant to be a social satire about a lower class man who wanted to be a writer and was absolutely corrupted by the bourgeois French, including Cécile de France, who would never allow him to be admitted to anything higher class in terms of society. And so his only avenue to be a writer was to eventually be convinced to be a journalist. And of course, journalism in 1820s Paris, when so many scandal sheets and corruption was going on after the revolution and so on that France was still going through, is quite amazing. And this film deals with that extremely well. It's interesting to note that Xavier Giannoli, who directed the film, he directed a previous French film called Marguerite. Now, that may not sound familiar to you, but when Hollywood got hold of it and turned it into Florence Foster Jenkins with Meryl Streep, which was unfortunately an inferior version of the original Marguerite about the potential opera singer who really wasn't. Anyway, the point is, he is a very strong director.
Nothing wrong with that opera singer except she couldn't sing.
Correct. Anyway, Lost Illusions is an excellent film. Gérard Depardieu is in it, as always. He's just about in every French film, isn't he? And it's interesting to note Xavier Dolan is in the film, who's not just an actor, but a noted director who's made a number of important films. This is a really well-made and informative film about a period in French history which is resonant to today in terms of the buying of views, of manipulating stories and so on. So it is a very impressive film, yes.
Yeah, so similar conclusion to Dave. I love the time they took, Jackie, to establish the contention and then plant hand grenades. I thought that really worked a treat. Did you not?
Yes, and I thought the narrative, it's a very full narrative. A lot happens. And in some ways that was to the detriment just for me, because much as I enjoyed all of the story, the characters were beautifully portrayed, strong. The look of it is lavish and takes us from the poverty to the opulence dramatically, but with such a full picture and so much to look at. I would say I found it hard work. It was rewarding in the hard work eventually, but I found it hard work to keep up with the visuals of it, the characters, the action, what's going on, and the narrative, along with the subtitles. A lot of the language was unfamiliar with us, it's not everyday language. You're listening to the French, you're reading, the subtitles that aren't common everyday language all the time, and then include in that some poetry as well, which normally we read when it's got a lot of descriptive words in it. We read it more slowly to kind of soak it up, and it was just whizzing by, and I found it quite a lot to take in at some points.
Well, I think you've got to concentrate, Jackie, to make sure you get all or as much as you can out of it, and theoretically, if you watch it a second time, I'm sure you'll pick up things you didn't the first time.
True. And I had no trouble believing in every character, and every performance was fabulous. And in the setup of the whole of the plot, it was, really as hilarious often as it was horrifying. Yeah. And I agree with the relevance to today, but particularly to the emergence of the online media and blogs and influencers and that, but definitely a relevance there.
But
interesting, yes.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I think that most people won't go and see it a second time in the sense that that's 5 hours, not just 2.5. But having said that, I got a lot out of it. I thought that the performances were really fine. Benjamin Voisin, he really impresses with his depiction of the self-assured Lucien, I keep on mispronouncing his surname, Rubempré, who undergoes quite the metamorphosis during the course of the picture. And Vincent Lacoste, he excels as this drug-addled wheeler and dealer, Etienne Lousteau. Cécile de France, always very, very strong. She readily channels a sad elegance and poise as Louise de Buck. The other one, Salome rather, de Wilde, really exuberant and effusive as Coralie. And Xavier Dolan, quite a finely balanced performance as Chadron's adversary turned ally. So I thought this was high-class cinema, very much at its finest, and no wonder it received the 7 César Awards I mentioned at the outset. They, by the way, included Best Film, Best Adaptation, I thought the cinematography was terrific, Best Costume Design and Best Production Design. So, significant awards. So let's get some scores for Lost Illusions, which runs, we've said, for 2.5 hours and is rated M. Let's start off with you, Dave.
I'm giving it 4 out of 5, which is an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Jacqueline.
7.5 from me.
Peter
out of 10,
will be higher.
Obviously.
Mm-hmm. Peter will be higher. Go for it, Peter.
Oh, a definite 9 out of 10 from me. A very impressive film.
And 8.5 for me. So I think we've spanned it all. 7.5, 8, 8.5, and 9. So very, very good. Lost Illusions, a film to be savoured.